hang on to these. Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's September 9th, 2022 program, Not Your Grandparents' Election, or is it? This is the first program of our 2022-2023 programming year, and my name is Karin Knutson, and I'm City Club in downtown Eugene, and to our live stream and listening audiences. It's wonderful to have you all here with us today at the beginning of yet another City Club programming year. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, the University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College. And we also receive generous support from the City of Eugene. And you too can help to support City Club's weekly programs and mission to build community vision through open inquiry by becoming a member at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. A year ago, we began our programming year with a series of discussions about the next normal. And this year, City Club begins by taking a look back at Oregon's history and also forward to Election Day on November 8th, 2022, when Oregon voters will choose a new governor, repopulate the Oregon legislature, and fill 3 congressional seats, among many other consequential local elections. Election Day is now just 2 months away, and City Club will be hosting a series of moderated elections programming with local and national candidates over the coming weeks. But first today, we lay our scene. The City Club of Eugene is pleased to welcome former Oregon Senator and political commentator Rick Metsger to discuss the upcoming November election. Thank you to Sandra Bishop for coordinating today's program, and she'll now come to the stage to introduce Rick.
Thank you, Karin. Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Bishop. I'm a longtime member of City Club and past president since 1990. It's a long time. I'm glad the City Club's still going. I want to thank you all for coming today and thank those who are listening on KLCC Radio. It's good to be with you today to introduce our program and our speaker, former Oregon Senator Rick Metzger. Our program today, Not Your Grandparents' Election, or is it? History is unfolding around us each day. Sometimes we take an active part, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're merely spectators. As the world watches the time-honored transition of power in Great Britain after the death of Queen Elizabeth, political history is also being made here in Oregon with recent and upcoming elections. Locally, here in Eugene, for the first time in the history of the city, a sitting city councilor is being recalled. After months of signature gathering and citizens canvassing door to door, there has been a recall placed on the ballot, and a special election has yet to certify. 60% of the constituents have voted to recall a sitting city councilor woman, history in the making. At the state level, voters in the Oregon general election in November will elect a new governor. No big deal, happens every 4 years. As many of you know, though, it's been 90 years since a candidate who is not a member of one of the 2 dominant parties was elected to governor in Oregon. The last time this happened was in 1930 with Oregon's first Jewish governor, Jules Meyer, of the famed or infamous Meyer and Frank family, was elected in 1930, served until 35. This year, we have 3 candidates running for governor, a D, an R, and an unaffiliated candidate. All 3 women, all 3 experienced in Oregon politics at the state level. Our speaker today will talk about this unusual governor's race as well as the filling of congressional seats. One of these congressional seats has not been open for 36 years. This is Peter DeFazio's seat. And there's also a new congressional seat due to the population influx in Oregon. So to tell you a little bit about our speaker today, Rick Metsger. Rick is a former Oregon State Senator and a former newscaster and a news reporter. My hypothesis about former news people becoming politicians is that they watch and they observe very carefully and they go, wait a minute, I could do better than that. So we're glad that Rick made his decision, whatever the underlying reasons. And I have to laugh when I read Rick's biographical statement that says he's been around Oregon political circles for 3 decades, sometimes as a sausage maker, sometimes as a taste tester. From my point of view of working in and around Oregon legislature, I think Rick has also been through the sausage-making machine. I'll get to that shortly. First, I want to thank Rick for agreeing to speak today to kick off our City Club of Eugene fall election program season. Rick has deep roots in Oregon politics, and we all benefit from his insights. Rick was born in Portland, holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Lewis and Clark, and he also holds a master's in teaching. He taught at Sam Barlow High School in Gresham from 1973 to 76, and I thought, oh, maybe that's why he became a politician. It was better than high schoolers, but I'm not so sure after the Senate. He was also an assistant basketball coach, and later he became involved with broadcasting. He was hired by KOIN TV in Portland as a sports broadcaster, and then years later went on to be a newscaster. In fact, a couple of years after he started broadcasting the news, Rick completed an investigative report into leaking waste tanks at the Hanford nuclear site, and the response to that was he was fired. And then, a short time, a few weeks later, that same report was broadcast with another broadcaster's voice and presence. And later, that piece won a Best Investigative Reporting Award from the Oregon Associated Press Broadcasting Association. In 1998, Rick ran for political office, and he was elected to the Senate. And I say elected. He ran unopposed in a Democratic primary, and in the general election, he won over a former Oregon House member who had defeated a Republican incumbent to get to that runoff in November. I tell you these details because as a policy wonk that I am, and as Rick is, we know that there are many people in prominent positions in Oregon politics these days who were appointed when they started their career. Rick was not. He was elected. Rick represented a district that was made up of parts of Multnomah, Clackamas, and Hood River counties. He was elected, then re-elected to the Senate in 2002 and also 2006. And here's where the sausage-making machine comes in. In 2008, Rick threw his hat in the ring to run for Secretary of State to follow Bill Bradbury. And the culmination of that was that Kate Brown became the next Secretary of State. And we know what the next step after Secretary of State is. Kate is now the governor. And in 2010, Rick threw his hat in the political ring again, vying for Democratic nomination for Oregon State Treasurer to replace Ben Westland after Westland died in office. Once again, the machine spit something out, and Ted Wheeler became the treasurer. And now, of course, Ted Wheeler's mayor of Portland. So meanwhile, nothing can stop Rick. One of the areas that Rick championed during his years as state senator was to strengthen credit unions and consumer financial protections. And that led later to President Obama recognizing Rick's expertise. And in 2013, then President Obama appointed Rick to serve on the 3-member board, the National Credit Union Association, and Rick served on that board until 2017, serving as president from 2016 to 2017. This is not a large 16-member advisory board. This is a board of 3 individuals running a department at the national level. So just to wrap up, I want to say that I worked with a lot of legislators in and around Salem. I was on staff for a while and then a lobbyist for decades. I don't remember a lot of those legislators that came and went. Rick was quite memorable. One of the things that I will always remember about Rick's time in the legislature is the Democratic Weekly. If I remember the title correctly, this is the Democratic Weekly, spelled W-E-A-K-L-Y. It was a broadsheet that would surreptitiously appear during the most tense parts of a session, and it was lampooning and humor. It was an incredibly humorous broadsheet that was talking about what not only the Democrats, but what everyone was doing in Salem. And with Rick's excellent writing and sense of humor, he would just relieve the tensions and break apart the stuckness of a legislative session when it gets really late in the session and no one can agree on anything. And Rick's little broadsheet would come out, and like any good humor, it would give that spaciousness to allow people to come back together and work in a bipartisan way. So it's my great honor today to introduce our speaker, Rick Metsger, former Oregon Senator, communication specialist, and humorist. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah. Thank you, Sandra. I find it great to be back in Eugene, be great to be back at the City Club. As Sandra mentioned, my last time at the City Club was in 2008 when we had this 4-way match for Secretary of State, 4-way senator match. Vicki Walker, who you would know very well, Brad Avakia, and myself, and Kay Brown. And it's the one time I really, looking back, I felt great finishing second. And I tell Kate all the time, I'm sure glad you're the one that's the governor now. It's not exactly the same type of political environment, and that we all were involved in for such a long time. And it was also great because, as Sandra mentioned, having an opportunity to go back and head a federal regulatory agency under the president obviously would not have been an opportunity otherwise. And that was absolutely great. And I can't tell you, every other weekend I'd be coming home to visit Oregon, sitting next to Peter DeFazio, and to think that, I said, Peter, you made this trip for 35 years. I only had to make it for about 7 years. And the sacrifice that our congressional members make to go back to DC and then come back to their districts on a regular basis, it's something you don't appreciate until you have to do it once in a while. So, you know, best of luck to Peter and for his great service to our state. You know, talk about politics. Well, you know, Oregon scientists, they have predicted for a long time that we have to get ready for the big one. But now, political scientists are kind of tell us that it's actually coming sooner than we think. And I'm not talking about any shift in the San Andreas Fault. I'm talking about the generational shift that is about to happen this November in Oregon politics. I think it's kind of ironic that our state capitol is currently undergoing a multi-$100-million renovation to earthquake-proof for the seismic shift that is about to take place, and tying that into the shift in politics certainly seems pretty appropriate. Now, while much of the country is facing what I would call electile dysfunction, a disease associated with myths, lies, and social unrest, Oregon is facing an entirely different form of major reconstructive surgery. So think about this for a moment. For 30 years, 3 decades, as a state representative, as a state senator, as a majority leader, as a Secretary of State, as a governor, Kay Brown has been at the center of policy making in Oregon. And this fall, she's leaving the stage. Peter Courtney, longest-serving member of the Oregon legislature, the longest-serving Senate president in the history of the state, is preparing his chase lounge for that patio outside his back patio overlooking the Willamette River with his hand of the AARP newsletter in front of him, ready to retire this November election. And then you have Tina Kotek, the longest-serving Speaker of the House in Oregon history, has left the chamber, and she's looking for another job. It's going to be a dramatic change of leadership that we have not seen in Oregon, as I look back through the history books, ever, all at one time, with new leaders taking the mantle. So, for those of you who love to play the lottery, I know you want a tip. So, I have the winning Powerball numbers for the drawing on Tuesday, November 8th. They are 4, 10, 17, 38, and 66. And your Powerball number is 1. So the first ball out of the chute is 10. 10 is the advantage that Republicans had held in what is known as the generic ballot early last year, meaning Republican candidates in polls started 10 points ahead of Democrats in who that respondent would be likely to vote for in their particular race. President Biden had terrible poll numbers, and his coattails, rather than an aid to Democratic candidates, were on fire and singeing every person that he came close to. Inflation going crazy, crime dominating communities, drug lines our streets, takes a home equity loan to fill up a tank of gas, and gun violence on a daily occurrence. But political winds can shift very quickly. When the Supreme Court overturned the Roe decision, it awakened a sleeping electorate. Complacency turned to anger, and apathy turned to action. Kansas, 2 weeks later, one of the reddest of red states, saw voters go to the polls after that decision and vote in a landslide to enshrine the right to abortion in their state's constitution. It was only the beginning. Then gas prices started to fall. Inflation, still extremely high, has showed signs of peaking and starting to decline. And the Biden White House has scored major victories on their agenda, making sure large corporations at least pay some taxes, reducing prescription drug costs, lowering energy bills, expanding healthcare access, and attacking climate change. What looked like a red wave turned to orange, then turned to yellow, and is now Arctic white. In recent polling, that 10-point edge for Republicans in Oregon from last winter is now down to essentially 0. 66, that's the next ball to come out of the chute. On that day in November, 66% of all legislators elected and headed to Salem will never have conducted an in-person legislative hearing at the Capitol, never face the public face-to-face. Due to stunning turnover and the onset of COVID, 2/3 of the legislative body have made decisions for Oregonians based on phone, text, and Zoom. The old man of the sea, you know him well, Floyd Prozansky. He's going to assume the title as the state's senior senator. And Greg Smith of Heppner will reign as king of the Table Round in the House. The next ball to drop will be 17. That's where I believe, based on where we are today, will be the number of Democratic senators in the next legislative session. That's a drop of 1 from the current supermajority enjoyed by the Democrats, which is currently 18. Last winter, there was a realistic shot that was going to be a tie. I and a number of my friends who observe these things looked at a 15-15 Senate as a real possibility. Now, the likelihood is 17. 2 Democratic seats are certain to go away. The North Coast seat held by Betsy Johnson will easily be won by Republican Susan Weber, a current state representative and former mayor of Tillamook. The other is the seat of my former colleague and very good friend Lee Beyer, who also is retiring. His district has been refigured through reapportionment so radically that it's no longer recognizable. It is now overwhelmingly Republican, and the seat will be taken by current Republican State Representative Cedric Hayden. That reduces the Democratic control of the Senate to just 1, and here is where it gets interesting. Democrats have a good chance to regain one of those seats in the eastern suburbs of Portland, where Democratic State Senator Mark Meek is challenging incumbent Republican and longtime political player Bill Kennemer. Kitty served with Bill Kennemer, and probably her grandmother served with Bill Kennemer, because Bill's been around an awful long time. This district, too, though, has been redrawn and now supports a 10% Democratic edge. Meek is aggressively working the shoe leather, which is important for all of you that have worked on campaigns, to do that door-to-door work, and he's raising the dollars. Kennemer, however, has been on the ballot for one elected position or another for 30 years, and he's familiar to voters. So he cannot be counted out. But with our old friend momentum now starting to bolster the seats of Democrats, Meek, I believe, has the edge to reclaim one of those seats for the Democrats this fall. The last 3 true battlegrounds are in Southern Oregon and right there in Salem. Incumbent Democrat Jeff Golden of Ashland has a 7.8% Democratic registration edge, but his Republican opponent is a much beloved and respected mayor of Medford and former police chief. And with Southern Oregon facing the same citizen discontent over crime, homelessness, drugs, this race could go either way. Golden has been outraised in this race, $292,000 to $133,000 as of today. And one thing I will mention to you on the website, if you ever want to look, it's OR Money Watch. OR is short for Oregon. ORMoneyWatch.com. It's one that our firm, PacWest, and Ryan Tribbett, who was with me today, the president of PacWest, spent hours and hours putting together. It allows you to track the money in politics in Oregon in real time on a day basis, not just the money, but daily trends, head-to-heads. It's a magnificent tool that's used by a lot of elected officials now, lobbyists, and other people wanting to see how the money flow is going. Now, Salem is home to 2 other races. Longtime Republican Senator Kim Thatcher has also had her district seriously altered and now shows a 5.7% Democratic edge. But she has outraised her opponent, Rick Walsh, by $218,000 to $100,000 as of today, despite losing the registration battle. The other seat is Republican State Representative Raquel Moore Green. She's challenging the first-time incumbent Democratic Senator Deb Patterson. Now, Moore Green is a real threat in that race, extremely hardworking and well-connected and liked business owner in the Salem area. As of this morning, she has outraged incumbent Patterson $444,000 to $199,000. Now, I think Republicans win one of those 3 seats. They could surprise and win 2. But I think the conservative end game is that Democrats will continue to control the Senate 17 to 13. The next number is 34. That's the number of Democrats I believe will hold seats in the House of Representatives. That's a drop of 3 seats from the current 37-23 split. Now, this analysis is based on registration, finances, candidate performance. Democrats will still control the chamber, but with the likelihood they will lose their supermajorities, the power brokers next session will be the more centrist Democrats and Republicans in both the Senate and the House who will have the leverage to shape or kill the legislation that they deem too far left for them or too far right for someone else. And the translation is, all these inexperienced legislators will have to learn to work together to advance any major legislation, and it will be those few remaining veterans who know the intricacies of the legislative process that will control much of the agenda. If you haven't talked to Floyd lately, talk to him. He's going to have a lot of power in Salem. The next Powerball number is 4. Oregon is about to see the number of female Congress members from Oregon quadruple in one election. Currently, Suzanne Bonamici is the only female member of Congress from Oregon, but with the addition of a new congressional seat for the state and a growing backlash against the Supreme Court in the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, those who believe that women belong in the House will finally have their wishes fulfilled. Republicans had the wind at their backs last spring. They had the real possibility of picking up 2 seats and bringing the delegation from 4 to 1 Democrat to 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. But Hurricane Dobbs has radically changed that forecast. Like the dog that finally catches the car, Republicans across the country have lost an issue that they have used successfully for decades to motivate their voters, and they've now ceded that motivation to not only Democrats, but independents and suburban Republican women, as we saw in Kansas, who are outraged by the decision. Republican candidates nationwide, and you may have read this in the Washington Post, Republican candidates nationwide have been busy scrubbing their websites of their anti-abortion stances in hopes that voters will forget when they go to the polls. Alaska just elected its first Democratic congressperson in half a century, filling a vacant seat, and in so doing, besting conservative firebrand Sarah Palin. You remember her. Val Hoyle, who you know very well, is running to replace Peter DeFazio. And in a newly designed district that has boosted Democratic registration, looks like a lock for the election victory. Andrea Salinas, who has been poised for a tough fight with Republican Mike Erickson, because it's a more moderate Democratic district, now is gaining steam and starting to show distance in the race. Republicans' best bet is in the 5th congressional seat, where Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner ousted conservative Democratic Congressman Kurt Schrader. The district appears to me to be much more suited for a moderate Democrat like Schrader than a liberal like McLeod Skinner. I would have favored the Republican Lori Chavez DeRemer in this race prior to the Dobbs decision. I know this district well. It was part of my old Senate district. It's where I live. It's different than Portland and Eugene and Ashland, and that's why Schrader has won in the general election all those years. But now, with the Dobbs decision, I rate it a toss-up. In any case, McLeod Skinner, who has run multiple times and not won, and DeRemer, who has run multiple times and not won, one of them is now going to win and be a congressperson. So with that, you can guarantee that we are going to have, instead of, as we have for years, 4 men and 1 woman in the House of Representatives representing Oregon, it's going to be 4 women and 2 men representing Oregon. And keep in mind how important Oregon is in the general election. That's why Nancy Pelosi was here on Tuesday. That's why Kevin McCarthy was here last week. We're talking 3 or 4 seats that may decide who controls the Congress of the United States. And with 3 seats up for grabs in Oregon that could go either way, Oregon, it runs through Oregon, determining the fate of the Congress. Now, because these congressional races are at the center of which party will control Congress, the amount of money flowing into Oregon is going to be obscene. It will easily outpaced every other election. And that means every other general election in which the president is on the ballot, and this is not the president on the ballot. For the first time, the Republicans are in Oregon with what is known as the coordinated campaign. They have not had a coordinated campaign in Oregon. The reason is it's been so blue, it's never been a targeted race. They knew they weren't going to win control of Congress. They knew they were not going to win the governor. So what they do, they put their resources in other states. A coordinated campaign is where they not only put money into a state, but they go from down ballot races all the way to the top ballot races, and they coordinate those campaigns. They bring in paid canvassers. They share information. It's that, a rising tide lifts all boats. So the more energy they put behind their Republican candidate for governor, it's going to help the people down ballot in the House and Senate for Salem. The more help that they give the people down ballot in the House and Senate, if they get those people to vote, it's going to help the person at the top of the ticket. No mailbox will be safe from this point forward. Your television screen will be taken over by continuous 30-second vignettes of scary black and white images, moving in slow motion with very scary music. Children will be asked to cover their eyes, their personal handheld devices placed under lock and key for their own personal protection. It's going to be an amazing year. And the only ones that we know for sure are going to win are all the people behind KZI, KVAL, KOIN, KGW, who are going to make one heck of a lot of money on this election, charging 3 times more than they normally would for an advertising spot, and no one else will be able to get one. You've probably already noticed that by now. The next number coming out for you Powerball winners is 37. That is the percentage of votes that will elect the next governor of Oregon. Slightly, just more than 1/3 of voters does not a mandate make. It will be the lowest percentage to ever elect a governor in this state. Here's where we stand as of today. Betsy Johnson feels she's starting to gain some traction. Over the Labor Day weekend, she was in a parade at a county fair in Lakeview. She commented to a friend of mine that only one person flipped her the bird. And she quipped, "I can tell I'm starting to make progress." Johnson remains an enigma to many voters, more like an enema to her opponents. She certainly has been the recipient of a lot of political compost by both the Republican and Democratic campaigns. What remains to be seen is whether all the negative advertising will suppress her vote or serve to reinforce her message that the two major parties would rather fight than solve the many problems facing Oregon. Johnson has long been the leading money winner, but as expected, the national money is starting to flow as if through fire hoses. Johnson right now stands at $8,083,000 raised. She has been $3 million, $4 million ahead of Kotek and Drazen. That changed this morning, so you're the first to know. For the first time, Kotek has now overtaken Johnson, reporting this morning $8,086,000. The question is, can Johnson, who's relying on primarily private donors, wealthy private donors, while the Republicans and the Democratic candidate are getting huge national PAC money from Washington, whether she'll be able to keep pace going forward with all that money that's flowing in from back east. Now, for her part, Republican nominee Christine Drazen has bundled Johnson with Democratic nominee Tina Kotek and attacks both simultaneously. It's kind of a BOGO. Buy one attack ad, get one for free. Now, she clearly hopes the approach will help mitigate Republican migration to Johnson's corner. Her real concern, however, should be how is she going to depress the Democratic vote for Kotek? Recent polling I have seen indicates the Democratic nominee is starting to enhance her lead over both opponents. And with the ground game that Democrats have perfected in statewide races, having Drazen spend money attacking Johnson is, in my view, advantage Kotek. Drazen's best approach would seem to be to solidify her message to Republicans to stay in their home tent, while peripheral groups target Democrats with a message that Johnson is the best choice for Democrats who feel the party has become the party of extreme social and elitist views that have caused the decay in our cities and suburbs, and that Johnson represents that old school Democratic view. Kotek, meanwhile, is running a solid campaign while applying a Teflon coating to her approach. She's sticking to kitchen table issues and sticking to her message, but rather than run a slew of ads where she personally attacks her two opponents and faces possible voter blowback, she focuses on her agenda, her accomplishments, and turns the dirty work of attack ads to surrogates, keeping her own image clean and upbeat. She is running like a front runner, a position she is used to as the former high school track star that she is. Only 24% of Republican voters voted for Drazen in the primary. Can she bring the other 76% back into the general election three-way brawl? Can Johnson shed the image of just a party crasher and convince the unaffiliated voter that she retains her traditional Democratic values, but tempered with old-school Republican sensibilities? And can Kotek convince Portland Metro voters that she's the problem solver, not the enabler of the deteriorating conditions afflicting the city? With the generic ballot tide moving towards Democratic at this point, Kotek has the edge, but tides do go in and out. After 2 months remains, that is still an eternity in politics. But my prediction as of today is that 37% will elect the next governor, and Kotek has the lead going into the final turn. All right, now it's time for the Powerball number. That's 1. And that 1 is you. It's me. Karen, it's every one of us to exercise our vote as part of this democracy. Democracies die by apathy. You go to the doctor because you have a sore leg or you have a sore arm. What do they tell you to do? If you want it to continue to function, you have to exercise it. You know, my father, grandfathers, yours is the same. Many went halfway around the world to defend democracy and our ability to vote. Yet across the country, we still have a lot of people who will not go across the street to vote. So if we want to preserve democracy, not only is our right, it's our responsibility to participate. And regardless of who your candidate is or your point of view, part of democracy is exercising that responsibility. So now I think we're going to take a 5-minute break, of which we will then have an opportunity to address a few questions before we close. Thank you very much.
don't expect there will be, but. Yeah, I'll hold on to it. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you. This is Sandra Bishop, City Club of Eugene. We're back from our break and we're going into our Q&A period. Our speaker today is Rick Metzger, former Oregon State Senator and communication expert. Our program today is not your grandparents' election, or is it? We're going to start with questions. Marty, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Marty Wilde, State Representative and Judicial Candidate. It seems likely that the outcome of the gubernatorial race is going to be determined by a plurality vote, not a majority vote, and that whoever prevails is likely to prevail only by a few points. If we had adopted ranked choice, star, or some other kind of primary system, might that have changed the results?
It really could. I mean, you don't know until you actually went through that. But let's do a couple of scenarios on something like that. Let's say, as I laid it out, it was something similar, and Kotek were to win, and Betsy Johnson and Christine Drazen each got 30%, and Kotek got 37%. Let's say, Drazen was the last place finisher, the Republican. Now the question is, are those people likely to go to Kotek, or would their second choice have been Betsy Johnson? On that one, you can make a conjecture that ranked choice voting might work for Betsy Johnson in that one. If it was the other way around, it probably could strengthen Tina Kotek's vote. But it would change. It would definitely change because you've got three distinct individuals running, and you can't take those unaffiliated voters. There's 1 million unaffiliated voters, but they're not a voting bloc. They all have their own opinion. So it would certainly make the outcome uncertain in a case of a plurality.
Paul Thompson, the City Club member for some time. What a great presentation. We really appreciate the insight on the legislative races and so on. But on the ballot, there is a measure also, Measure 114, which is loosely called gun safety legislation. I wonder if you have any comment on whether that would cause some of the voters to be galvanized to show up that they might not otherwise, and if you have any prognostication on how that measure will come out in the election.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I have not seen any polling on that measure, so I don't have any insight at this point on that one. In terms of what it would do for voters, I think an issue like that would have a tremendous impact on people to vote, except in this election, they already are so motivated, So let's say we had, your run-of-the-mill midterm election coming up. I think that would really drive turnout, both from those who feel their gun rights are being taken, or for those who feel it's about time we do something about guns. That's a motivating factor. But I think it might reinforce the turnout that we're going to have, but I think we'd have the turnout anyway. So I think you'll pretty well max out on people's opinions on that. And it will be interesting when polling, but I haven't seen anybody do any polling on it yet.
Joel Corin, City Club member
Hi,
since
Joel.
2012. Can we expand the view, and can you give us your predictions for who will control the United States House and the United States Senate?
Yeah. I can't give you great expertise. I haven't done the really detailed to say, look you in the eye and say with authority. It's long been felt that the Republicans will take the House, but last spring, most of the Morning Consult and the other polls that have credibility were predicting maybe 60 seats more would go to the Republicans. The one thing that's certain is that's off the table now. When I talked about that generic ballot, the generic ballot nationally has also moving very close to even now. It was double digits in favor of Republicans. Now, and why Nancy Pelosi was here and Kevin McCarthy is here. This is going to be very, very close. It's not going to be a landslide for the Republicans. I think they still have the edge. But the Democrats, if this momentum continues, could alter that landscape. But it's going to be extremely close. On the Senate, I believe, and I never thought this last winter, and if anybody told me they thought it, I think they were lying and they were just too partisan to see the truth that Republicans were going to take the Senate. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Democrats are going to win the Senate, and again, it's Roe v. Wade. And if you see that in the different senatorial, well, there's two reasons. It's Roe v. Wade, and the Republicans have recruited the worst batch of candidates they possibly could. And you've even heard Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, raise his eyebrows over the kind of people that won those primaries are not the people that, generally speaking, general election voters look at and say, I want them as my representative. So I think the Democrats are not only going to stay in control of the Senate, but I think they may gain a seat or two.
Mary, before you ask a question, I wanted to ask one question that came in earlier. We know that you can't make a recommendation as far as, who you would support in the governor's race, but this is a very unusual race, and people are saying, well, what is the characteristic I should be looking for in a governor? So can you talk, as a former elected person, can you talk a little bit about what makes a good governor? What should people be looking for?
Yeah, that's a good point. I had a long conversation last December at the home of John Kitzhaber, and John and I were talking about a lot of things. And I asked him about that, the different personalities and what's it going to make to be a good governor. And what he told me, and I really took this to heart, because all three of the people running have skills. They all have resumes that show they understand a lot of different issues. But he says, to be a good governor, you've got to keep yourself from being transactional. And the fact of the matter is a lot of politicians are transactional. I'll do this for you, but you got to contribute my campaign. They may not say that directly, but that's the implication if you want any help from me. And he says, because as governor, there's too many barriers for you to get your agenda apart if you don't have both sides willing at some level to support you. And if you become transactional, it's like John F. Kennedy once said many years ago, in politics, friends come and go, but enemies last a lifetime.
Thank you. Mary, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I have my question, which just emerged out of that comment, and something else that happened at our table.
Would you introduce yourself?
Mary Layton, City Club member. You opened by saying there was going to be a generational change. And personally, my qualm with all three of the candidates is they have been in elected office for a long time. If they were going to make the kind of changes they claim to be interested in making, why did we not see more of that?
Yeah, well, I think, you can go back and look at the primary elections, because we had 31 people running for governor of all different stripes, right? And I'd say a couple of things. This is anecdotally, just the way I see this. The general election, the higher you get up on the food chain, in this case governor, people really want to feel confidence that they've been through the block and know how to do it, which leads to people who've had a lot of experience, whether they've been change agents or not. That experience level is more important for that than someone who's running to be a state rep for the first time. And I think that's how that ends up at the end of the day. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but the comfort zone, when you're top leaders, generally in your state, you want somebody that you know is going to be able to control the process.
Okay, and now there's a question from our table.
Yeah.
Do you think any Republicans will contest Oregon elections? That seems to be the fad.
Yeah. Well, a year ago you would have laughed at that. So I'd hate to say, that's not a possibility. It does seem to be popular now that elections are safe and secure if I win, and they're a fraud if I lose. But as of right now, our election system is very good. Our election workers are still very, very good. If someone wanted to protest something like that, I just don't think it would gain any traction. We've had 30 years of our vote by mail. It's been audited so many times. The amount of mistakes on that are minuscule, and the ones that are generally didn't affect the outcome. It was more of a process question. So I think someone would make a fool out of themselves if their answer was fraud, you know. And I think the response would be, well, maybe the voters thought you were a fraud. Maybe that's what that was all about.
Thank you. Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew Kallick, City Club President-elect, and also for the purpose of this question, a proud millennial. You talked about generational change election, but unlike many other states that have had changes of the guard, there aren't that many millennials in those races that you mentioned, let alone Gen Z. Is there something about Oregon's political structure that makes it harder for younger people to sort of get involved in that way, or is it just the strength of the current candidate pool that has led to that?
Yeah. Well, two things. I think if you look at the House of Representatives in Salem, that is changing. There's a lot of, when I say young people, they're not 23, but they're 31 and they're 32 and they're 33. And when I was in the Senate, the young one was Ryan Deckard, who looked like he was 16, but he was 26, but the next one up was like 40 and then 56. So there are a lot of younger folks now in the House of Representatives, and you'll see them matriculate, I'm sure, through. Again, it's being involved. It's wanting to take the mantle and run for your school board, run for that. I do believe, and I've believed this for a long time, in our Oregon legislature in particular, it's known as a volunteer legislature. You know, I had 165,000 constituents. They didn't think I was a part-time legislator or they needed something. I needed to be there, help them now. And you know, you can get food stamps being in the legislature. You know, I mean, it was $23,000 a year when I was there. It's now ballooned to a radical $33,000 a year, roughly, to be a state legislator. 3 members of the legislature withdrew from running for re-election this year because they couldn't afford it anymore. After a few years, you know, think about it. If your net income is $1,800 after a gross of $3,300, how are you going to pay your bills? So I do believe the legislature needs to raise those salaries. There's been moves to do that. Kenny knows this very well. Legislators are afraid to death they're going to get kicked out of office for doubling their salaries. I've always thought that was BS. I think people would understand the fact that they want to have legislators in there. They're not getting rich to make 60 or 70 grand a year, but can afford to focus on their legislative duties and not have outside work.
Thank you.
How close are we?
Oh, we brought 5 minutes.
Joel Corrin again. You talked about a coordinated campaign. Is part of the coordinated campaign avoiding talking about the issues? Avoiding candidate forums?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're right, Joel. I mean, when you're looking at a overall strategy from the Democrats or the Republicans, especially on hot-button issues, like, for example, we talked about Roe v. Wade, okay? You bet that's going to be coordinated. It's going to be coordinated among Democrats. It's going to be coordinated among Republicans because it's on everybody's radar, and they want everybody to be on the same message. And the message that they want to be on is going to be at different sides, but they don't want to upset, their strategy by having that. And so I talked about the scrubbing of the websites, by Republicans. Democrats are pulling them up on the websites, making it very clear. And, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're making sure that their candidates, because they're doing the polling, they know this is going to motivate their base. They want that up there. When they talk about the price of gas going down, they want them talking about that, and they give them talking points. So yes, good or bad, there is kind of a cattle call on prominent issues to try and make everybody stay in line so you don't dilute the message, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Thank you. The City Club had some difficulty getting some of the major candidates to forums, and it was quite obvious that it was avoiding the issues. So one of the other questions that came in has to do with campaign financing, and this question came in a couple different forms. One, since there's so much money, and you talked about this, Rick, when you were laying out the latest numbers, which are quite shocking, over $8 million in individual campaigns, almost approaching $1 billion for a candidate running for Oregon governor seems almost unreal. But some voters are very concerned as to what does this imply if someone's getting these $1 million contributions, especially in the case of individual private businesses and private individuals giving these large donations to candidates. And what I have always said, well, you know, it's Oregon. There's not a lot of graft. These people are not smart enough to, to get it directly in their pockets. This is campaign money. And it's in a realm where people are playing in this, at this level with this amount of money. But does it actually, are they actually buying votes? Or are they buying access? How does this money affect the person who's taking the money when they get into office?
Okay, this is, by the way, we could talk about this for an hour, and I think we have about 1 minute left, so I'm not making this short because of that, but I was told right there, you know, to make sure that we stop on time. And as I mentioned to someone before we started, you know, I was a broadcaster. My first rule by my news director was, Rick, the TV light comes on at 5. And you better be ready. And at 5:30, it goes off. So, you know, if you're going to keep wandering, you're talking, no one's going to listen to you. So let me keep this really short. I certainly share the concern. I think most people in this audience and watching this share the concern about money in politics. The problem is, you know, what are you going to do about it? I know there's a lot of efforts to limit contributions. They're well-intentioned. The problem is you can do that, but you can't limit expenditures. And under the Supreme Court ruling in United, that means if I can't raise money from you all folks with a lot of money for my campaign, you can't stop someone else with those same millions of dollars doing me a favor and running their own campaign for me on my behalf, but not officially giving the money to me. In other words, the money's going to be there anyway, right? It's just that, am I going to be accountable for it, or someone else will say, well, that wasn't my money. I had nothing to do with it. I don't know why they're running ads for me. So that's the difficulty. I do not believe that in a general sense, I'm talking generalities here, that the money buys the votes of those legislators or members of Congress. What it does do, it does buy them unaltered access. And access makes a big difference in terms of what voices you keep hearing and the ones that you never hear. So it is important. Candidates, you know, remind you, and those given money remind them during the election cycles that I've been good for you, give me some money, and vice versa. So until we can come up with a better way, that's going to be part of it. But I think for the most part, elected people are honorable and are actually trying to do the best thing, and they're navigating a campaign finance system they don't control, but need to have a way to communicate with their voters. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our City Club President, Karen.
Thank you both so much. This has been our September 9th, 2022 program, Not Your Grandparents' Election, or is it? Before we thank our speaker one last time today, I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information is available at kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. And you can find more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and you can learn more at peacehealth.org. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And we are grateful to generous support from the City of Eugene. I would also like to acknowledge today's gold sponsors, Drs. Ferguson and Fife Dentistry and Hummingbird Wholesale. And thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info, and Simplified Commuting LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And, of course, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Our programs are always available to you on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, as well as by podcasts. Look for that information at cityclubofeugene.org. And we invite everyone, members and non-members alike, to participate in our programs in person at our 2022 venue, the First United Methodist Church at 1376 Olive Street, or of course by live stream and via YouTube. More information is on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Next week, City Club will host representing West Lane on the County Commission with West Lane County Board of Commissioners candidate Don Leslie. KLCC reporter Brian Bull will moderate this forum, the first of several over this fall, looking at local and national political decisions. More details, information about future programs and City Club, the organization, can be found on City Club's website, cityclubofeugene.org, and we invite everyone to join us in person at First United Methodist Church in downtown. Finally, one last thank you to today's speaker, Rick Metzger, for your thoughts on our unfinished business and the work that every generation has to do to support our democracy and to participate in our elections. It has been a pleasure to welcome you to the City Club of Eugene today. Thank you. And thank you all for being with us. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.